So I'm thrilled to introduce our next speaker. Jody Kuzenko is the Director of Business Strategy for the Ontario operations of Vale's base metals business. She is responsible for the development, the implementation, measurement, and reporting of Ontario's operations, strategic initiatives, and integrated business plans. Ms. Kuzenko first joined the former Inco in 2004 as Chief Legal Officer for Ontario operations. Devoting much of her time to regulatory work associated with safety, health, and environment, she transitioned to the role of General Manager of Sustainability for Ontario operations in 2008. In 2009, she took over accountability for sustainability for the entire North Atlantic region until she transitioned to the role of General Manager of Production Services in 2013, and subsequently Director of Refining in 2015. Prior to joining Inco, Ms. Kuzenko spent 8 years in private practice at Demira Keenan LLP. We work with human beings and other things I know for sure. Please help me welcome Jody Kuzenko.
Good morning. Thank you, Angèle, for that kind introduction. I never think of myself that way. I always just think of myself as a kid from Sudbury. And so thank you for that. I'm honored to be here. I look out over the crowd and I think about all of the knowledgeable people here, and I really am honored to have this time to talk with you. I also want to thank Mike Prant for putting me up after the professional speaker, like the woman who's written a book. Very helpful for me. It doesn't hurt the ego at all. It doesn't make me nervous. I thought I'd start with my talk today about what my aspirations are for the talk. What goal do I have about this hour we have to spend together? And my aspirations are really centered around the people in the room. You're in this room because you are in a leadership role on safety. It doesn't matter to me whether you are a company or a union or a regulator or from academia or a workplace partner, or whether you lead a crew of 20, or whether you manage a business unit of 1,000, or whether you lead just yourself. You're here because you're in a leadership role on safety, and you actually care about safety. You care about it, which is very important. And so my goal here today is modest. If I could get the people in this room who are leaders in safety to just think about safety a little bit differently, and to maybe ask some different questions the next time you're thinking about doing some safety work, then I'll have achieved my purpose here. I'll be happy with the hour we spent together. And before I start into the content, I wanted to tell you a little bit about how I got here. Mike Prant called me maybe 2 months ago now and asked me if I would be interested in speaking at this conference. He said two things to me. One, he said that their lineup of speakers from industry in particular had a bit of a sameness to them. They'd been traditionally male. And he thought it would be really neat if he could have a woman from industry come up and talk. Crazy, right? A woman from industry come up and talk. So on that note, I want to welcome Mike and WSN to the 21st century. I'd also like to welcome the mining industry, or in fact, invite them to join the 21st century. Sometime before next century would be great. The other thing that Mike said to me, he asked if I could provide some commentary on safety culture, my experience with safety culture, and more specifically, what it takes to build a positive or a good or a constructive safety culture. It's a complicated question, and the reality is that I'm not sure. I've been in various roles, you heard, in the mining industry for coming up on 15 years now. And I've seen a lot of things work really well, and I've seen some things work not so well, and I've seen some epic fails. But with all of that, I'm genuinely not sure what a step-by-step plan looks like to build this positive safety culture in your business or in my own, for that matter. And whenever I find myself as a leader in the most complicated leadership situations that require clarity of thought and long-term vision and taking really messy, complex topics that require that we elevate them to simplicity, I always start with one simple question. What do I know for sure? In this whole big mess, what do I know for sure? And if you think about that, if you really think about that question, what you know for sure is not that much. And I use this little model to frame my thinking on what I know for sure. And it goes like this. If you think about all of the things there are to know in all of the universe, over all of the time, by all of the people since the dawn of time, what there is to know is a huge expanse. That's represented by the gray circle there. What I know is a very small piece of that. It's actually getting smaller as I get older, I'm finding. When I was a teenager, I knew a lot. Now I don't know that much. What I know for sure is an even smaller sliver. What I know for absolute sure, like I know 2 goes into 4, the sun sets in the west, that's an even smaller sliver. What I know I don't know is another piece of that. That's represented in the red. Okay? Getting things from what I know I don't know into what I do know, we're very used to that. I think about that as learning. The example I have is quantum physics. I don't know quantum physics. If I wanted to know it, I could buy a book, take a class, learn it, and get into what I do know. The more fascinating question for me is what I don't know that I don't know, particularly on the area of safety culture. And this, if you start to think about that, opens up a whole new world of discovery, a whole new space that we can discover together if we just open our minds to it. So what could we as leaders, with our employees and our businesses, discover about what it means to build a positive safety culture? Now, before we get too much further into discovery, I want to start at the start, which is some facts and data. Those of you who are in the mining industry, you're going to know we love our safety data. If you can take a piece of information and cut it 900 different ways by time of day, body part, gender, time of shift, all of that, we will do that. We love to look at data in different ways. But for today's purposes, I wanted to keep the data simple. What you see here on the screen is a graph of the Vale, Ontario operations performance as it relates to total recordable injury frequency. And it's over a pretty broad expanse of time, from 1997 to 2018. For those of you who don't know what total recordable injury frequency is, it is a metric that is a mix of all of our injuries. Our medical treatment injuries, our restricted work injuries, and our lost time injuries rolled up into one metric that is designed to inform us as leaders in some way about how we're performing on safety, how many people are getting hurt and how severe it is. And we put that into a frequency. And if you look at this graph, you'll see that since about 2010, our performance on total recordable injury frequency has been flat. We've plateaued. And in speaking with many of my colleagues in industry, they tell me that they're experiencing the same thing. I've heard it described in different ways. We're flatlining, we're plateaued, we're not making any advancement. And what this graph doesn't show, I purposely didn't show it because I wanted to keep it simple, is that over this period of time that's depicted up there, we've also tragically had a number of fatalities. And we also have had a number of high potential incidents. High potential incidents are incidents in our operations that we started tracking a number of years ago as part of our fatality prevention program that are those moments in the business that we call the holy shit moments. Incidents that could lead to critical injuries or fatalities, and the difference between those two things, a high potential incident and something very much more serious, is often just a matter of seconds and inches and luck. And so in the face of this performance, plateaued total recordable injury frequency and fatalities and high potential incidents, our response as industry is to do more work, more of what we have been doing. More systems, more procedures, more laws, more committees, more action items, more enforcement, more orders. In Ontario operations alone today, we have more than 4,000 non-critical procedures. We have another 900 critical procedures, and like all of you, we're grappling with hundreds of pages of legislation and regulations and codes and CSA standards, which amounts to thousands of sections and rules that we must abide by. Well, I want to go back. Can I go back? Where's my slide with the fellow with all of his hands up? Next. There we go. And so the point is, we're doing more of the same. And I feel a lot like this fella. I do. And I can only imagine what the experience is for our frontline workers. And here's another point, that our institutions are by and large designed to perpetuate this machine. Investigations at Ontario operations are more likely to lead to writing a new procedure, producing a new document, producing another piece of paper, than the alternative, messier kind of work. And so in the face of this, in the face of plateaued total recordable injury frequency, and in the face of the knowledge that we're doing more of the same work, I get to the first thing I know for sure. Remember, I was going to tell you about the things I know for sure. And the first thing I know is that the kind of thinking that got us where we are is keeping us where we are. Data, systems, standards, policies, procedures, they're all completely necessary in our continued journey towards zero harm, and I would submit they're all completely insufficient. I don't want to be heard to be making the case that we don't need these things. We absolutely do. They absolutely got us where we are. I don't know where we would be without all mine standards and the Occupational Health and Safety Act. What I am telling you to think about is that they're necessary but insufficient. Another point on the data, when you heard me talking about it, you heard me talking about it in very technical terms, very clinical terms. Fatalities, lost time injuries, total recordable injury frequency. This is language in the industry that we're all used to. It's very technical language. It's comfortable. It's consistent from company to company. And notice, I want you to notice that it abstracts reality quite nicely for us. What if, instead of using the word fatality or fatality frequency, we started to talk about human lives and lives lost? And what if, instead of using the word lost time injury, we started to talk about lives changed? This change in language would be a deep recognition of the fact that a sprained arm is not the same as a lost arm. They both could be lost time injuries, but one has an everlasting life-changing effect. And this is why at Vale, Ontario Operations, we're starting to transition in our definition of zero harm. It used to be traditionally centered around total recordable injury frequency, that first metric I talked about. And I would submit it arguably got us focusing on some of the wrong things. So now we're starting to talk about zero harm being no lives lost and no lives changed. It's a big difference. And when you hear me say that, you start to see the possibility of access to a different conversation. Which takes me to the second thing I know for sure. Language is a very powerful tool in shifting mindsets. As leaders, what we talk about and how we talk about it matters. Every time I read that, I want to call Donald Trump and let him know that what he talks about and how he talks about it matters. But it is very important. So no lives lost and no lives changed. So that begs the question, if I'm after creating a positive safety culture, and I've historically spent most of my time on technical systems and technical work and implementing technical solutions, what else is there? And I think the what else question starts to be answered with the very simple fact that we work with human beings. Yet we introduce systems without regard to that fact, like we're introducing the robots or automatons or programming a machine. But these are people with thoughts and ideas and free will and history and biases and their own backgrounds. And yes, I'm going to use an F word here because I'm in a mining company. They have feelings. Not the same F word that you were thinking about, but these people have feelings. And if you accept that, to change a culture, you need to change the conversation. Could we open up a conversation about what is going on in the hearts and minds of our employees? Could that be an area for discovery for us as leaders? So I'll start with what's in the head of our employees. And when I think about that, the first thing I start to question is whether people's minds are healthy or whether they're unwell. And our data in Ontario operations is telling us that for many of our employees, their minds are unhealthy. 1 in 4, today, 1 in 4 of our disability claims is centered around mental health issues. 1 in 4. 30 to 40% of our lost days are as a result of people struggling with mental health. This is why a couple of years ago we launched a mental health study, the first of its kind in industry that I'm aware of. And I want you to notice that big bold line there. We didn't go it alone. We knew we couldn't. We knew we didn't have the technical skills and capability, and we needed support. And so Vale, in partnership with the United Steelworkers, in partnership with the Centre for Research of Occupational Safety and Health, CROSH, based out of Laurentian University, we came together to design a mental health survey. Getting that survey together was a complex exercise. It had to be informed by all of the brain science so that we asked the right questions of our employees to enable us to get back some information that would be relevant in terms of identifying what mental health issues are in the workplace and some other key criteria. And the survey was many pages long. It took about 2 hours for each employee to complete. And when we were going in, we had doubts about whether our employees would complete it. We're not a big survey-taking company. Our response rate on employee engagement surveys is really low. I could not believe over the course of that summer we had more than 2,200 employees take the survey. The take-up was unbelievable. And the questions that were asked in this survey were deeply personal questions on how you feel about your mental health. Have you ever struggled with it? What do you use for coping mechanism? How are your relationships? Like, these are really personal questions. And our employees had the courage to answer them because they knew that the information was important. They knew that the information would help inform a strategy around mental health that our operations needed. And so this survey centered around 4 key questions. What is the state of mental health and well-being of our employees? What factors are related to mental health and well-being? What factors predict the absence from work? And what are the facilitators and barriers to get people back to work after they've experienced a mental health issue? So the survey's now been administered and we've received some preliminary data. The preliminary data caused us to ask a number of additional questions, so that data is being analyzed and we expect to see some results back in the not too distant future. But at least getting into this work allowed us to form the fundamentals of a strategy around mental health. And you can see it depicted in the bottom of the screen there. We call it Minds for Minds. And centered around 5 key pillars. We say take 5 for mental health, meaning 5 minutes, and focus on the 5 pillars. And the 5 pillars are as follows. Monitor on mental health. So we're teaching employees about mental health signs and symptoms. Intervene. Very important pillar. We've taken many of the leaders in our organization, some of whom are sitting in this room, and we've given them mental health first aid training, a 2-day course, mental health first aid training, which allows them to identify signs and symptoms of mental health issues in somebody else and appropriately respond and intervene. Very important. The 3rd pillar is normalize. If I had to pick one of the most important things, this is the one. This is the idea that in order to make advancements on mental health, we must destigmatize the issue. And what we did in our workplace, can you imagine a mining company, predominantly male, tough guys too. What we did in our workplace is we invited people to share their mental health stories, both in print and in a video. The people who came forward and read and wrote mental health stories and were willing to share them was overwhelming to me. I mean, the courage it takes for somebody to stand up and talk about a tragic childhood and how that's impacted them. But sharing those stories allowed us to normalize the conversation. So before, where people won't get help, maybe now, just maybe now, they will. The 4th pillar is encourage, the reporting of signs and symptoms. And the 5th pillar is support. And we do this through the adjustment of our employee assistance program and our employee family assistance program. And we do it through modifying our return to work processes after mental health issues. We all know how to take somebody back to work after they had a sore arm or a sore ankle. Getting someone back into the workplace after they've had issues with their mental health is a whole different ballgame. And so we've modified those processes. All of that mental health work has taken me to the third thing I know for sure. Mental health issues are real. They touch all of us in some way. And we need to continue to advance our work to understand them and to find better ways to support our employees through them. So if we move away from mental health, remember I said we wanted to decide whether our minds were healthy or unwell. Move to a situation where our employees' minds are healthy. What is an area to discover there? And the question for me becomes, how does the brain work on matters that are related to the fields of safety? And so in the last number of months, we started to reach out to a number of industrial psychologists and a number of industry partners to determine things like, what makes people take risks? What happens in the brain when an employee, well, my slides are going crazy here. They have a life of their own. What happens in the brain when an employee is rushing, or when they're feeling frustrated, or when they're bored and complacency takes over, or when they're feeling fatigued? What happens? Does the subconscious take over? Is there something that we can understand about the brain function that will enable us to support our employees when their brain takes over this way? And the more important question for me is, what behaviors can I then connect to that so that things become habit forming? So when an employee is experiencing fatigue, A, they recognize it, and B, a habit is formed to perhaps take themselves out of the line of fire right away. So this is a huge area of study. It's fascinating. We're very early days in looking into it, and I hope to have something to tell you that I know for sure next year at this time. So once we're considering minds being healthy and unwell, I get to the other question, the questions of the heart. Flip. There. Now this cartoon depicts that there's approximately 30 centimeters from the head to the heart. And this is no magic to anybody. If you put your hand on your temple, put your hand on your heart, you look at the space, it's about 30 centimeters. Doesn't seem a long distance to gap. But for those of you who ever coached a sports team, or who ever done some difficult leadership work where you're trying to enroll people, you know that A, getting the heart is important, and B, 30 centimeters is a huge gap to bridge. It's huge. So the question for me becomes, how do we connect the mind with the heart? And how, as leaders, do we connect with the hearts of our employees? And the answer for us at Vale Ontario Operations resides in part in something we call home safe. Next slide. There we go. There's the logo for Home Safe. And this really is our solution to put the heart into the equation. What's Home Safe, you might ask? I'll tell you what it isn't. It isn't a program, and it isn't a system. I like to think about it as a mindset or a call to action. Really, I think about it as access to the hearts of our employees. And how Home Safe came about in Ontario Operations is very important. It started in 2013. In 2013, we were coming off one of the safest years in our history. Statistically, our total recordable injury frequency was a couple of basis points lower than it had been, so we were feeling pretty good about ourselves. We had lots of things going for us. We had lots of work in play on safety and health management systems. We had a program that we had borrowed from another operation that we implemented in Ontario Operations that created a common language for our people. We hadn't had that before. It was working quite reasonably at the time. Our tone at the top on safety was great. Our leader was a guy who had grown up in the mines and was very passionate about safety and zero harm. Everything was working great in 2013. And then in April of 2014, we had a fatality in our smelting operations. And for those of you in operations, you know that is absolutely devastating. And it absolutely calls into question everything you've ever done as a leader. And so with that fatality, on the heels of everything going great, we started to do some reflection. And our boss took us in the leadership team into a room for 2 whole days and said, what are we missing, guys? What are we missing? And after 2 days of duking it out, the answer was we didn't know. If we did know what we were missing, we would have been doing it already. But we did know who did know. You know who that was? Our employees. And so out of that, we decided to go speak to our employees. Out of that, we designed something we call Journey to Zero sessions. And what these sessions were, they were facilitated by a leader in the business, sometimes company, sometimes union. What these sessions were, we get 20 people at a time into a room for a whole day, 8 hours. And we'd give them the opportunity to reflect on their own safety, what's working for them, what isn't working for them, what's working for their crew and their workplace and what isn't, and what's missing. What could we do differently? What could we do better? What could we stop doing to try to get us to zero harm? And the role of the leader in that session was to facilitate, which is fine, we always do that. I mean, we facilitate in our day-to-day work. But the role of the leader was so important, it was to listen, to really open up and listen to what our employees were saying. And we took all of that feedback, and that takes me to the 4th thing I know for sure. As leaders, listening is even more important than talking. Listening shapes the speaking. How you listen as a leader will determine what people tell you, whether they tell it to you, how much they will tell you. It shapes the speaking. Even worse than that, leaders who don't listen will ultimately find themselves surrounded by people who have nothing to say, which is a terrible place to be if you're in a leadership role. So in all of that listening, our employees were actually telling us in these Journey to Zero sessions, they were telling us in their own words, pay attention to my heart. Make me care about something as I come to work. And out of that, Home Safe was born.
This is my reason to come home safe.
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 safe. This is my reason to come home safe.
This is my reason to come home safe.
This is my reason to come home safe.
Come home safe, Daddy.
Come home safe.
Come home safe.
Come home safe, Dad.
Come home safe.
Come home safe, Dad.
Come home safe.
Come home safe, Dad.
So pretty cool, right? Yeah. I can tell you this, that when we launched this in 2015, our employees felt heard. We hit the mark here somehow. And I think it's because we discovered Home Safe together. We co-created it. It was created by our people and for our people. And so safety programs will come and go, but I can promise you that Ontario operations will never lose the idea of home safe. Funny story about when we launched it. This video, it was explained to people, and this video was shown to people at our plants and mines. And at Stobie Mine, we were getting feedback that day as the video was being played in different parts of the business. And at Stobie Mine in particular, got feedback that this old guy had been in the industry for more than 30 years, crusty old miner, always the guy standing in the back of the room with his arms crossed. You know this guy if you work in industry. And he was standing back there, and this video played. He actually got choked up. And you know what he said? He said, I've been working here for 30 years, and they finally got something right. They finally got something right. And so what I learned in that is when employees feel fully understood, when they know that we care about their heart, and when they feel heard, there's some kind of different access pathway to them. And it is so important as leaders that we do that. So I want to tie all of this together. The three areas that I talked about today, the technical, the minds, and the hearts, I think can be stitched together to form safety nets or layers of protection to keep our employees from harm. You need all three of them, I think. But what if it also provides leaders a clue on how to gain access to our employees? I think we know, that to get to the heart, you start with the heart. But what if to get to the mind, you start with the heart? And what if to get to the mind doing technical things, you actually pull back and start with the heart? Now, starting with the heart is uncomfortable for most of us, me included. We're used to the technical work, we like it. We actually talk about the heart work as soft skills. To my mind, that couldn't be further from the truth. Working with the heart is the hard and messy stuff. But to truly transition the conversation into places of the head and the heart, we're going to need leadership. Maybe not the kind we've traditionally valued, maybe not the problem solvers, the white knight leaders who come in and save the day, but maybe a different kind of leadership. Maybe leaders who have the courage to be vulnerable, the courage to do more listening than talking, the courage to be curious about solutions that are messier than the next procedure, and the courage to discover with our employees new areas for building a safety culture, a positive safety culture together. Which takes me to the fifth and final thing I know for sure. I only know 5 things. That's crazy, right? But it's true. The fifth and final thing I know for sure. To reach the hearts and minds of our employees, new leadership is required. That's it. Thank you. So I'm happy to take questions from the audience with a bit of time we have left, if there are any. Was that clear, right? One back here?
A follow-up is there with your the Home Safe program. Is how do you integrate that into your daily operations and meetings? Is there like how does the mid-tier management implement that into your everyday work?
Yeah, so that's such a good question. And keeping home safe alive is something that we grapple with as leaders all of the time. And we elicit feedback from our operations on how to actually keep it alive. It manifests itself in a couple of ways. Sometimes we just need energy up in the workplace on safety. And so last month, for example, our HR group was accountable for keeping Hope Safe alive in the month. And so they produced sort of little sticky notes that said, use this and remind someone of their reason to get home safe. Just write a note, stick it on someone's windshield. I see that you backed in today. I see that you've performed an act of safety. Write an encouraging note. So we use those sorts of things. And we also, behind Home Safe are sort of fundamentals where we plan work with risk management, we care for one another, we lead, we accept accountabilities to work within boundaries. And so weaving that into a day-to-day conversation becomes a natural thing for our leaders. And from time to time, we refresh posters and signs to get people thinking about their reasons to come home safe. And the last thing we did that I thought was very effective in those Journey to Zero sessions that I talked about, we gave people on the way out a home safe commitment card, like a commitment card of their own personal safety, about what I am committed to as a leader, what I am committed to as an employee to keep myself safe and those around me safe. And so we're trying to keep that alive with Home Safe, rebranding it, and things like that, but getting people to make their own personal commitments on safety and keeping them alive. It's not easy work though, right? When you're implementing a program, the next procedure is an easy thing to do, the next step in a management system, you know what you have to produce. This requires some different sort of thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the questions, can everybody hear me? Please use the microphone. One of the questions you talked about for mental health.
Yeah.
People with antidepressant, ADHD. What are you doing to help the workers when they get traumatized by their fellow coworker who's, say, lost a finger or lost an eye?
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that person, say as a coworker,
Yeah.
coping with that and going back to that place where that person lost his finger or lost his eye?
Yeah. That's such a good question. It comes up frequently, right? It's not an easy thing when you either are in a workplace accident, a serious one, or you witness a workplace accident. We don't have a stepwise process to deal with that, but it starts with recognizing that employees are not feeling right because of their participation in that. And it starts with, remember I talked about monitor, intervene, and some of our key leaders taking mental health first aid training. So if you're in my workplace, for example, and we had an incident last week, and I see that you're not right, or you're not behaving in the way that I know you are, then as a leader, I would say, okay, I'm gonna go back to my first aid mental health training and ask you, how you doing? How you feeling today? Is that really bothering you? But I don't want to leave the audience with the impression that we are somehow now all experts. We're not. We're supervisors, we're superintendents, we're managers, we're general managers. The idea here is to be able to get people to talk about it. Get people to talk about when they have a problem, or as leaders to identify and support them in intervening, and then get them the help that they need. I mean, we're not experts in PTSD treatment or anything like that, but if I know that happened, and I'm alive to the issue that mental health issues are real, and I know my employee and he or she isn't behaving in the way that is consistent with how I've seen them behave over the years, then I can actually get them some help. And that to me is the important part. Because the early evidence is that the earlier we get people help, and appropriate help, and the earlier we reintegrate them into the workplace, the better off their experience will be.
Okay, so let's share something here.
Okay?
How many people, and I will admit it, I have ADHD.
Right.
When I was 21 and I told my parents that, my dad thought I was going to die. Oh, what is that? Because he didn't know. Didn't know. So what happens now when you mention that to your supervisor or your superintendent? If that person is not knowledgeable, he hasn't got a clue of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So he can't help you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I've seen this in the workforce, the place where I work. I've been there close to 38 years. And you talk to people, and if they don't understand, they shoo you away. It's not out of ignorance, it's because they don't know.
Right. Not only do they don't know what they don't know. It's even worse, right? And so first I want to thank you for having the courage to say that.
I always say that at all of my...
So excellent. That's a big deal.
And there's people in here who are probably scared to say that.
I bet there are.
I won't say put your hand up,
Yeah.
but...
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's where we have to talk about this.
Yeah.
And if you don't talk about it, you kind of stay in the closet.
Right. I mean, we can't address problems, either in business or in mental health issues. We can't address problems that we're not talking about, that we don't know about. And so our mental health study and that 5 pillars is our attempt to get these problems out in the open, make them okay for people to talk about, and then get people appropriate support in the workplace.
So that's why I'm going back to the original question. When somebody sees somebody get hurt,
Yeah.
and that person is hysterical or whatever, you have to learn how to talk to that individual.
Agreed.
Because if you don't, that person's just going to keep it inside for a never and amen.
Agreed.
Right?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Tammy, hello.
Thank you for your talk, Jody. Your last point in particular, there are some younger people in the audience too. I don't include myself in the younger category anywhere. Leadership and changing leadership, and particularly for the mining industry, if we look around, we're a pretty homogeneous group. So what are some of the strategies that Vale is looking at to attract a different type of leader? You know, someone that hasn't been the typical hire to try to help to get over new perspectives in terms of how we might tackle some of the challenges within the industry.
Good question. I would say at Vale we're pretty nascent in those strategies. I mean, the mining industry now is just recognizing the importance of diversity. And it comes up in gender a lot. In our Ontario operations, I think we're running right now at about 7% women. Diversity is not only important in terms of gender, but in terms of viewpoint, culture, ethnicity, all of that. And diversity is a business issue. I want to land this for this crowd. That having a diverse workforce means you will have better shareholder returns. It means you will produce more money, it means you will have a safer workforce. And unless and until the leaders in the mining industry recognize this as a business issue and not a women's issue, we will go nowhere on the issue of diversity. We'll stay exactly where we are. That's a whole different talk, but I would say we're coming alive to the issue that we need to do it. We don't have a lot of strategies in play to get diversity in the workforce. We're starting to adjust some of our interviewing techniques to attract and retain First Nations people, for example, but we're not yet there on gender diversity or cultural diversity beyond that. I think that's a frontier that must be explored. Yep.
So you're just a second. Somebody else?
My legs go as fast as I can.
Thank you. So it kind of follows up with what Tammy was saying. We have leaders in our organization already that may be a bit, quote unquote, archaic in the way they deal with things. But so what are you doing as a company to work with the internal leaders that you have? And I'm talking not just about frontline, I'm talking right up to the top of the organization, because sometimes that's where some of the problems are, right? And so how do you deal, and everything starts from, in my opinion, top down. If we don't have leaders in our organization that are setting the example, then that in itself is a problem, right? So how are you dealing with that to change the culture of that style of leadership at Vale?
Yeah. I'll tell you this, we don't have a specific program around it. And I do disagree with one thing that you said, that leadership starts top down. I think leadership can start anywhere. In fact, I encourage it. I encourage it. The greatest leaders that have ever been around in the world, Martin Luther King, nobody's appointed him a leader. He just took it upon himself to show some leadership on an issue that he was passionate about. And so I encourage that in all of our employees. But we don't have a program to sort of convert old school, traditional type leaders into sort of new school, new thinking leadership. But what we do is start to open up conversations about home safe, about the idea of connecting with the heart. We do some training. We did last year and the year before training that is called Leadership as a Choice, where we showed leaders in the business different models, a leadership triangle, a drama triangle. The opposite of leadership is drama. How do I lead through people being victimized or feeling like they have no hope? And so we do have some training programs. And one of the things I think that's important, that doesn't get talked about a lot, is modeling the kind of leadership that we want. And so it's incumbent upon all of us who've now seen this talk, who work at Vale, to model maybe a different sort of leadership. Not materially different, but maybe instead, when I get that next safety issue in front of me, instead of concluding that I need to write a procedure and PC the crew, whatever the story is, that maybe, just maybe, there's an opportunity to take a different approach. So I would say we're firing on a few cylinders there. We have some training, some modeling, some leading by example, but we have a long way to go, I think.
I got another one.
Yeah.
I got 10 minutes.
I'm not sure.
You want to duke it out? Who's going first?
So my question is the mental health program that was initiated between Vale, the steelworkers, and Crosh, is that study complete now?
Well, the survey is complete. Analyzing the data is anything but incomplete. I mean, there were hundreds of questions on the survey, so you can slice that in a number of different ways. We have received some preliminary feedback and showed it to the union, and that caused us to ask a number of additional questions. So Crosh and Dr. LaRiviere are gone back with his students to do some further analytics on the data, and they're going to come back to us probably in the not too distant future, in the next couple of months, with some additional findings. And once we have those findings in hand, then we have the tools from which to build our strategies, right? You need the information to be able to make intelligent decisions about what the work looks like in mental health, because it's a complicated space. And people, I would say employers, especially employers in the mining industry, there's no guidebook on this. So we're some of the first to make it up as we go.
So there was mentioned a while ago that there was a lot of personal questions that were asked in the survey.
Yeah.
Did anything from that survey stand out? Like for typical Northern Ontario mining, was there anything that just stood out and say, whew, that's our start point?
Yeah, there were a couple of things that stood out. I don't want to get too much into the detail because it's important that we show it to our workforce and our leaders first, but there were a couple of themes. One is that our employees are fatigued. They feel a little bit burned out. Some of us drink more wine than we should. And we're a highly engaged workforce. Those are a couple of themes that stood out. And then there are a number of sub-questions that...
Once the survey is complete, will it be shared, or will it be shared publicly? For
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question yet. We will share something publicly, certainly. We'll share more with our own employee base and the union, but we will share something publicly. None of the personal stuff, of course, but I think this is important to get this conversation going about mental health in the industry. The fact that we're talking about it in Sudbury, Ontario, at Vale United Steelworkers is so important because we are going to start the rest of the world getting lit up on this issue. So it's important that we communicate it. Jamie.
Not so much a question as a comment. So I worked with Jody for a year, so she already knows this and mentioned at the beginning of her speech, but one of the things I'm hearing in the conversation is that I'm not hearing echoed, and maybe it's implied, but I want to point out when we're talking about leaders in the room, the cornerstone of the act is based on IRS. And your leaders in the room aren't just people with titles in management, they're worker reps and they're workers on your committees. So the MINDS acronym actually came out of our committee, from the worker side of the committee. 8 out of 10 people saying, I'm seeing this in the workplace, I don't know what to do. And so we did some work with Keith Hansen and came up with it was a whole different animal before it came to the MINDS thing, but it was, in 1 hour, how can we teach people to respond to mental health in the workplace? Because you don't know what to do. You don't know if approaching someone's going to make it worse or better. And so in the questions and stuff, and maybe it was implied, but I didn't specifically hear people say, talk to your workers, because one of the first things Jody said was, the rails came off at Paul Rochette when he died at the smelter. And I'm the worker up at the smelter, so I know firsthand how bad that was. And we started talking to the workers to develop a whole new program. So where we go from here includes talking to the workers and involving the workers. And I just want to make the comment, because if you don't say it, people don't hear it. And I know you did say it originally, but I just want to, maybe a good way to close.
Yeah, totally agree, Jamie. And stay standing for a moment, because I want to acknowledge Jamie for a minute. In a speech he made, he doesn't know he had this impact on me, but in a speech he made last year at the Day of Mourning, he said something like, if we could just talk about mental health like we talk about dental health, the world would be a better place, which is like such a simple statement, but that helps inform the normalize, the destigmatization. So I want to acknowledge you for the courage on that, and thank you for your leadership on the mental health issue. I'm supposed to wrap now, which means questions, or I'm getting the hook. Yeah. So look, I want to thank WSN for taking a risk, having a woman from industry up here. I appreciate it. And I want to thank you guys for your attention. I know this topic can feel a little bit soft or a little bit uncomfortable, but I encourage you to have the courage to dive in. Try something new. What could go wrong? Yeah?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You may recall when Jody came up here, she thanked Mike profusely for putting her on stage after a professional speaker. I think you've just got your new profession. And I think you know a lot more than just 5 things, and we're going to let you go because Trump is on a line for you. He's waiting for some, yes, he's waiting for your professional advice.